This parable of the talents, I would argue, is among the most abused texts in the New Testament. It's a really well-known story, the parable of the talents. The master entrusts his servants with the property. Like the parable of the 10 maidens who we heard last week, bridesmaids, virgins, depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, which comes just before this parable. Both those parables tell of the kingdom of God. The kingdom, however, is not simply linked to the man going on his journey, but to the story that follows it, a story that illustrates how the disciples are to wait until the Lord comes. So, in this story, a wealthy man prepares for a journey by entrusting his estate to his servants. In the Lucan version of this parable, in Luke's Gospel, 10 slaves receive £1 apiece to do the master's business. In this version from Matthew, however, there are only 3 servants, and they receive shares, retrospectively 5, 2, and 1 talent. We are talking here about a really significant amount of money entrusted to these people. A talent is believed to be equivalent to roughly 6,000 denarii. Since 1 denarius was a common labourer's daily wage, a talent would be roughly equivalent to 20 years' wages for the average worker. 5 talents, the largest amount entrusted to any of these servants, is comparable to 100 years' worth of labour. It's an astronomical amount of money. This reading has been used to promote and justify, incorrectly in my opinion, a gospel of economic prosperity. Something along the lines of, if you're good and faithful and you use God's gifts wisely, you will be financially rewarded. The reason that this theory falls down, in my opinion, is that some of the most holy people, some of the most generous of spirit, some of those who dedicated their lives to helping others because of their faith, in sacrificial service to others, lived lives of absolute poverty, or at least with very little. This parable is not about financial wealth, but about faithfully working towards God's kingdom. The servants with 5 talents and 2 talents continued their master's work in his absence, and they were rewarded with a great return on the investment, and they received additional responsibility and entered into the joy of their master. In other words, they were rewarded for their hard work. But the slave with the 1 talent didn't work hard. Depending on how you see this story, he either played it safe or he was lazy. He didn't work on getting a return for his master. Now, while I do in all honesty think this is a reasonable way to approach this parable, I do have one problem with this thought pattern, and that's this. There are 4 significant words in this reading that come in verse 15, and those words are, according to his ability. We're told that these amounts of money were given to each person according to his ability. So, while my understanding, as I've just explained, holds true that continuing to work for the kingdom, working hard, will result in a good return, the theory that the 3rd slave, the one entrusted with 1 talent, was not as able as the other slaves, so he couldn't have expected the same level of return, gives me a problem. I believe that the condemnation that he received was not due to the lack of return. Rather, it was due to his lack of effort, his lack of commitment to continue the work of his master. As most of my school reports used to say, must try harder. God doesn't expect the same return from each of us, however you understand that. But he does demand the same mind, the same effort, which is total. So, what about us here today? The pandemic has been a really good mirror to hold up to this parable. Ordinarily, one of the ways that we might measure return or success or see the fruits of our efforts in the church would be in terms of numbers of people attending church. Well, that's out the window at the moment. Even when we are allowed to meet in church, many are too nervous to do so. Social distancing limits the numbers who can do so. Another way that we might measure our success or return is money-wise. How are our churches doing financially? Well, people giving directly through the bank, as many of you do, helps a great deal. But inevitably, giving is down. Our income is down. There are currently no, and even in the past few weeks, there have been less plate collections. Fees from weddings are down to almost nothing. No baptisms, hence no baptism collections. So we can't measure our work towards the kingdom there. But many people have been working really hard in these difficult times. For example, to open the churches for private prayer, to look out for their neighbours, to keep community spirit going, and to care for the most vulnerable within our communities. Many people have been working faithfully to continue in the worshipping and the praying life of these churches, albeit largely online. And to help me as we think about how we can reach out to our communities at this coming Christmas tide via social media and other channels. This is the work that could have our Master, God, saying to us, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave," to use the language of the gospel. But if all we do is moan about what we can't do, if we anchor down, withdraw from society, in other words, if we stop the work of the kingdom, then we could be branded wicked and lazy slaves. The end of our gospel tells us, "For to those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away." This is not preaching the gospel of financial prosperity. This is a promise of reward to all those faithfully working hard for the kingdom, and a sobering warning